Folks, we did it. We somehow crafted a Royal Doom King Baller Drock on my freaking ult account. We take those. So to commemorate, we're doing another Zombie World deck profile. And this is a bit long overdue since we've had quite a few updates since the last profile I did. So last one was just when we got Deer Note. And since then, we've gotten some massive updates since that has drastically shifted the meta. So we've gotten Ishizu cards, as well as recently we've gotten Tearlaments, which we're now dealing with the fallout of that format. But hey, at least Instant Fusion got banned, so there's that. Anyway, so here's how I'm cooking with Zombie World nowadays. So it's a 60 card deck. It's basically just mill and gas and just get as much in the graveyard and wombo as much as you can until you just set up a whole bunch of just degenerate boards, ideally. So usually you're ending on some boss monsters, but the whole idea is you're trying to set up Zombie World as well as Doom King Baller Drock in play. So Zombie World being a field spell that allows you to turn all monsters on the field and graveyards into zombies. Typically, you're turboing out Zombie World from the deck by activating Necroworld Banshee's effect in the graveyard to activate Zombie World from the deck. And then Doom King Baller Drock allows you to special summon itself as long as there's a field spell during the standby phase of either player's turn. So that's typically how you special summon Doom King Baller Drock. You try to get into the graveyard in some means, whether through your selective millers such as Unizombie, or through just random millers such as your Chaos Ruler, your Sheeran, your everything. So, or even just sending it from the hand to the graveyard when it happens to be in your hand with monsters such as Foxy-Tune, for example. So the whole idea of Doom King Baller Drock is whenever a monster that's a zombie monster activates its effect, you could either negate that effect or you could non-targetably banish a monster from either player's fields or graveyards. So the idea and the synergy with Zombie World is all monsters in the field become zombies. So now any monster effect that your opponent activates in the field or in graveyards is suddenly a zombie effect that could be negated by Doom King Baller Drock. So it's a very interactive boss monster that could put a lot of pressure on the opponent, as well as Zombie World potentially being a floodgate to opponent's monsters if they have some kind of like type requirement, for example, or if they're Flunderies and require tribute summoning, which Zombie World just happens to prevent non-zombie monsters from being able to tribute summon. The floodgate aspect typically isn't like the mainstay of like how it ends up putting like pressure on meta decks, unless you're playing like Rivalry of the Warlords along with Zombie World. But this is very much focused on being more of a combo variant rather than a control variant of zombies. So how does the deck typically play? So the idea is you have a few ways of popping off, but usually you're trying to set up a Chaos Ruler ideally. So the few ways that we have to do it is we have Xeomin, which is just your standard P.U.N.K engine. Xeomin could search Foxy-Tune, which will allow you to special summon from the deck a Deer Note, and then that allows you to go into Chaos Ruler, allowing you to then go ahead and use the effect of the Deer Note to special summon that Foxy-Tune. So now you have 2 level 8s, you mill 5 with the Chaos Ruler, and then you have the ability to then overlay into the Zombie Vampire to mill 4 more, and then special summon one of those monsters milled from both your set or your opponent's graveyard. And then you kind of go based on what you mill, and there's like a lot of like decision making that's going to be made based on what you mill. So usually you try to like focus on getting all your random mills first, so like whatever mills from Chaos Ruler, from Zombie Vampire, from other random millers such as Sheeran as well as kitkallos, and then afterwards that's when you start using your more selective millers such as Unizombie, being able to send any zombie monster from the deck to the graveyard. Same with Kazuki, able to do the same, and Shang-Chi. All of them can mill a specific zombie monster from your deck to the graveyard. So the reason we play this P.U.N.K, the one that I will mispronounce terribly, is because there are situations where if you start off with specifically a Foxy-Tune can special summon from the deck the Xeomin, but if you don't have any other P.U.N.K cards, Xeomin searching for a Deer Note, for example, isn't going to do anything, and you already used the effect of Foxy-Tune to special summon, so you can't search for another Foxy-Tune and do it again. So in that situation, you would then search for the Sharakusai, allowing you to the normal summon it, use its effect to fuse into the Rising card, which will then allow you to activate its effect to then special summon from deck a Xeomin as well as a Deer Note. And then you could go ahead, proceed to special summon a Chaos Ruler, use Deer Note's effect to special summon the Rising Carb, and then you do the same play where you overlay into the Zombie Vampire afterwards. So it just ends up allowing you to make sure you still have combo even if your only starter is just a Foxy-Tune. Also, Emergency Teleport is just amazing because when you do Emergency Teleport, then you just have the whole combo without even needing to use your normal summon, because you just special summon the Xeomin. You can then go ahead and use the Foxy-Tune to special summon from the deck the Sharakusai. So again, you could special summon summon the Deer Note instead, but I like to go into this one specifically just because then you could thin the deck a little more since you go ahead and get both this one out of the deck as well as then being able to go ahead and special summon another Xayah from the deck as well as that Deer Note. So it's just a little bit more deck thinning, allowing you to then make sure that you hit more of the appropriate targets off of your Chaos Ruler and your Zombie Vampire. So then we have ourselves as well the Solitaire and the Unizombie. Solitaire is supposed to go ahead and tribute itself to typically special summon the Unizombie from the deck. You could also technically special summon Shinobi Necro, but that's typically not what you end up using Solitaire for. It's only for niche situations. So Solitaire into Unizombie allows you to then use the Unizombie's effect to send a zombie monster to the graveyard. So it really depends on what else you have going on in your hand and in your graveyard, and that's what you're going to be milling. But a basic combo is if you have Solitaire, tribute into Unizombie, you could then use Unizombie to mill Mitsuki. Mitsuki in the graveyard will then allow you to summon a Solitaire from the graveyard, so you have a level 4 tuner, the Unizombie, as well as a level 4 non-tuner. The reason Unizombie is level 4 is because it could raise its level or any monster's level by 1 by sending a zombie monster from deck to the graveyard, and it could also do the same by sending a card from your hand to the graveyard. So that makes you a Chaos Ruler, and then from there you could proceed to pop off. It's not as reliable as Xayah plays because there you specifically guarantee having a zombie vampire follow-up after the Chaos Ruler, which being able to mill 9 cards as well as getting a second body on board is just huge, and that second body that you get from zombie vampire could sometimes be an enabler, such as like a Unizombie or a Gazuki, for example. But that being said, being able to even just go to like a Chaos Ruler off of like the Solitaire into the Unizombie play could be very huge, especially if you have other graveyard setup or even cards in your hand that allow you to extend as well. So that's really the main play. We also have Gazuki, which does also mill a zombie monster. It's not as versatile because it's not a tuner, but it also has the ability to be another miller. So the way we like to do it is we kind of like to cycle through our 3 guaranteed main deck zombie millers. So the Unizombie, the Gazuki, as well as Shang-Chi. And then we have an extra deck zombie miller that we could make typically using Shang-Chi as well as the Mad Mauler. So that allows us to basically kind of like cycle through Mitsuki so that we could have extenders, as well as getting Necroworld Banshee and Doom King Ballardrock into the graveyard so we could set up having like the full Zombie World combo while also getting a few boss monsters to go alongside it. So this is really meant to be like a synchro build where it's like end board is typically focused on putting down really strong synchro boss monsters. So Borreload Savage Dragon, Baron DeFleur, and F8 Dawn Dragster. And the idea of this, typically you're going to go ahead and try to set up having Shang-Chi in the graveyard so that you could summon it off of banishing it with Chaos Ruler's effect to bring itself back, banishing a light, typically that light really honestly just being the Foxy Tune. So it's easier to do this when you have the P.U.N.K engine in play, since you don't really have any other light monsters, and it's terrible if you have to banish a Fairy Tail Snow instead. But then you banish the Shang-Chi, that allows you to special summon it, and then by banishing another zombie monster, so ideally the Shinobi Necro, because when that's banished, you can special summon it as well. And then you use Shang-Chi's effect to send Mad Mauler to the graveyard, so you could then go ahead and special summon Immortal Dragon using the 2, since Shang-Chi will now be level 4. And then you use the Immortal Dragon to go ahead and send any zombie monster that you need, but typically it's going to be either a level 8 in Doom King Ballardrock or a level 4 in either Necroworld Banshee or Mitsuki or sometimes even Gazuki, just to extend further plays. And that's going to make Immortal Dragon level 2, allowing you to use it, as well as the Chaos Roar to make a Baron DeFleur. So that's like one of the single ones you do there. And usually if you have a Link monster, typically you either have a Vampire Sucker or an IP Masquerena, and usually what you do there is you go ahead and link off that Immortal Dragon into the Sprite Elf using that Vampire Sucker or the IP Masquerena, and then you could use that Sprite Elf to then special summon back the Mad Mauler. Mad Mauler restricts you into zombies when you summon it by its own effect, but doesn't restrict you into zombies if it's summoned by another way. So Sprite Elf brings back the Mad Mauler, and then you have yourself Baron DeFleur, and then other ways you could go ahead extend. You have Unizombie being level 4 by sending a card from the hand or the deck to the graveyard, as well as any other level 4 monster, whether it's Fairy Tail Snow, the Gazuki, or whatever modulation you make, such as summoning a Danger Jackalope and modifying its level to 4 using Unizombie's effect. There's a few ways that you could go ahead and summon Borreload Savage Dragon by manipulating it to level 8. Also, Shang-Chi, as well as a Mad Mauler summoned off of like a Sprite Elf, or even a Shinobi Necro summoned off of its own effect by banishing it with Shang-Chi, for example, could be another way of getting a Borreload Savage Dragon. And then Dawn Dragster is just a third way of us just providing an oppressive negate. Usually we summon it off of a Unizombie that's just its regular level, along with a level 4 monster like the Gazuki or Fairy Tail Snow, or we summon it off of like a Unizombie that's level 4 along with like a Danger that's level 3, for example. So a lot of it really depends on just like your game state and your ability to manipulate levels as well as like your board so that you can get the right levels needed to get like multiple synchro boss monsters on the board. So we play a little bit of a tier limit engine. So the idea is we play Tearlaments Sheeran because it's an extender. It both allows you to special summon itself while allowing us to mill 3 monsters and sending a monster from our hand to the graveyard. So all of those could be very beneficial. Sheeran could send a Mizuki to the graveyard, a Balrdrock to the graveyard. It could send one of our millers, so the Agido or the Kelbek, or even one of our shufflers, the Keldo or the Medora, to the graveyard. So while also setting up more graveyard plays for whatever its mill is. It's random, but it's good random, and it's another body on board that allows you to go ahead and have more like link plays if needed. And we also play a Rhino Heart, and Rhino Heart just, again, it's another normal summon typically, but it's not great to have that many normal summons. I was pretty mixed on it, but I like the idea that Rhino Heart, if I don't have any other play, I can normal summon Rhino Heart, dump Sheeran, and then that's a kitkallos. Kitkallos can then go ahead and add Sheeran, and then we could go ahead, start sending stuff from our hand to the graveyard, milling more cards from the deck, and then afterwards, ideally we get ourselves another body on board so we could link off that Sheeran. Typically you do that with like a danger play, for example, like a Nessie, link them off into like an IP Masquerade, for example, and then you use Kitkallos' effect to send itself to the graveyard so you can summon back that Sheeran, and then you could go ahead and mill 5, and from there potentially do some crazy plays. It's kind of like its own chaos ruler if you have the right circumstance for it. So, but other than that, we also play like a danger package, which is there both to be extenders as well as to try to get a lot of fancy stuff to the graveyard, as well as be able to allow us to just cycle through our deck. It has just a lot of purposes, and the reason I played these funky ratios, so I played 3 Nessie and only 1 Jackalope and 1 Tsuchinoko, is really because we could theoretically use Sheeran to fuse into Kitkallos if we have Sheeran as well as a Nessie. So even if we don't get into Rhino Heart, if we just have Sheeran but happen to also have a Nessie in hand or milled it as well, then that could be its own kitkallos, and that could sometimes be huge off of like a chaos roll or a zombie vampire. If you manage to mill that Sheeran, having increased chances of being able to actually go ahead and like summon a kitkallos from it just makes your board that much more cracked potentially, or your mills that much more cracked to then make your board that much more cracked. So that's the idea of it, and I play 1 Jackalope and 1 Tsuchinoko. Typically level 3s are more important on board than a level 7, so like the idea of Nessie is like if I go for Nessie, I could go ahead and search for a Jackalope, and if Jackalope discards itself, then I could go ahead and special summon the Tsuchinoko, and then I at least have a level 3, or if the circumstance needs it, then I could summon another Nessie off of Jackalope. But the idea is that there's at least some flexibility in terms of like which levels I summon off of my Nessie and my Jackalopes, for example, and then I could also thin the deck in the process. So that's the whole idea of that. Other than that, we play just the max amount of Ishizu cards as we can. Medora and Keldo are just essential in this format where everything wants to activate its effects in the graveyard and everything wants to stop everything else from activating its effects in the graveyard. So it becomes your line of defense when you have to pop off, because sometimes you might be a little scared to use the effects of Agido and Kelbek. Really, the situation of the current meta is basically like, if you feel like you need to go in, then go in, but if you feel like you have a guaranteed play and you don't necessarily need to mill with Agido or Kelbek effects, it's very easy to trigger them, but it's really important to know specifically when to trigger them. So you could trigger them with Sheeran effect, you could trigger them with grass effects, you could trigger them with chaos roller effects, with zombie vampire effects, you could trigger them with Foxy Tune effect, you could trigger them with your danger effect, you could trigger them with even Unizombies effects. There's so many ways to get Kelbek and Agido in play. Sometimes even normal summon Unizombie, discard Kelbek, Agido could lead to some pretty crazy situations. But again, you always have to be mindful of the fact that nowadays that's also going to benefit your opponent, so you have to be very careful about that. Other than that, Fairytale Snow is just an insane card to have in the graveyard at any point. So if you have Fairytale Snow, then suddenly the amount of extending you can do is like bajillion times better. It comes off really well with the Shinobi Necro as well as the Shang-Chi, allowing you to go ahead and special summon them via their banish effects if you banish them with Snow. Even if you just banish like a Shinobi Necro, you could use Snow to banish the Necro, and that'll allow you to get the Necro on the field, and that's a level 4 and a level 2, allowing you to make Immortal Dragon and potentially extend from there. So it's really just like a really flexible card that can do just so much to increase the ceiling even further of your deck. For pretty much everything else we play Abyss Dweller because it's this current format. You need to play Abyss Dweller. So the whole idea of it is that like we can very easily manipulate getting a bunch of level 4s on the field. Unizombie could easily become level 4 if needed, or change another monster to level 4, like let's say a Jackalope. since Unizombie could change any monster's level via its level modulation effect. So really, it's if you're able to go ahead and gas it up with like a whole bunch of level 4 monsters before you actually like start doing your crazy mills with Keldo and Agido, then you make Dweller as soon as possible. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of being able to make an early Dweller. Usually it's either Dweller or Chaos Ruler, and if you make Dweller, you're going to have a very underwhelming board versus Chaos Ruler can give you a whole lot of potential plays, but then you're going to have to take a little bit more time to actually be able to set up the bodies you needed to go for Dweller play later on. And at that point, you're going to have to decide whether you're going to say no to Agido and kelbek effects or say just the biggest yes to them. So, but it's there as an option as well as also a potential end board option as well. So even if you're not able to do it early, but you know that your opponent's deck will be impacted by Dweller, then it's a relatively easy monster to go into when needed. And finally, we just have our payoffs to link climbs, either with IP or even just for your follow-up turn. IP so that we can go into Nightmare Unicorn and do some more disruption if needed, or even go into Appaloosa after using up our plethora of other negates that we have. It's just nice to also have Appaloosa as well as another and boss monster for the opponent to deal with. And then on our follow-up turn, we can easily go into Axis Code Talker, and since we have Sprite Elf in the deck now, we could easily banish 2 different attributes, so we could go ahead and actually use Axis Code Talker's effect twice and just OTK from there. So once it's set up, the deck pretty much just plows through whatever and has insane amounts of follow-up. Balerdrock has so much synergy with Zombie World, allowing you to not only go ahead and respond to zombie effects from zombies that are like usually zombies, but also non-zombies that are now zombies. So you have a Shuffler in the graveyard under Zombie World. That's a zombie effect activating. You chain Balerdrock, you banish a card on your opponent's field or graveyard. That's a monster, and you're just insane. And vice versa, if your opponent tries to go ahead and shuffle one of your monsters with a Madura, for example, well, it's a zombie, so Balerdrock is going to be like, no, you're negated, so get me out of here. One thing that previously was more of a concern was the fact that like we only played 3 Zombie Worlds, and like we really have no in-engine way of being able to recur Zombie World, or at least previously. So before I was even considering playing Barricade Board Blocker, but now that we have Shufflers, like you could just go all in and like mill as much as you want without having to worry about whatever Zombie Worlds you have left, because you're very likely going to hit one of your Shufflers, more likely to hit that than all 3 of your Zombie Worlds. So if you hit all 3 Zombie Worlds and you have a Shuffler, then you just bring the Zombie Worlds back to the deck, and then you're going to be able to activate it off of Necroworld Banshee, and you're just chilling. So now the reason why that's a good thing is because you really want to save the Zombie World activation as much as you can. So I always save the Zombie World activation until I know I have no more random mills. So random mills being the Chaos Ruler as well as the Zombie Vampire, and maybe that grass looks greener. And the reason for that is because to be able to make kitkallos, it requires a Tearlaments monster and an Aqua monster. And Zombie World will turn your Aqua monsters, so your Sheeran as well as your Nessie, into zombies in the graveyard. So if they go to the graveyard, you're not going to be able to use them to summon kitkallos. You'll only be able to use the Sheeran to summon a kitkallos if you happen to have a Nessie in the hand or another Sheeran in the hand, since they will still be Aqua. So that's why I try to keep the Zombie World out of play until I know that I no longer have the option to go into a kitkallos play, knowing full well that if I happen to mill all my Zombie Worlds, I could just bring it back into the deck before activating Necroworld Banshee's effect. So it's really nice to have that little bit of a fallback so that I don't have to worry about whether my engine is just basically contradicting itself. So finally, we have Vampire Sucker. Vampire Sucker is just a really nice card to go into because a lot of times it's like the midpoint for your climb into Sprite Elf, so it allows you to both go ahead and get draws, since like whenever a zombie monster is summoned from the graveyard onto either player's side of the field, you get to draw a card. Whether you have Zombie World on the field and you go ahead and summon back a now zombie Chaos Ruler, or you use Mitsuki to summon like your Unizombie, or whatever way you do it, it's a nice way to get a draw. You could also go ahead and clog your opponent's field if you're afraid they're playing stuff like Lightning Storm, for example. You summon a monster from their graveyard onto the field, and now suddenly they have to commit to going to the battle phase. So like something like Numeron no longer could OTK you. They have to crash, and then main phase 2 maybe make something dank, and then hopefully from there you can prevent them from making mega clocks, because you only really have one out to it. But just as an example, the whole idea of Vampire Sucker is just a really nice card to go into, both in the sense that it could give you free draws, and it could just be a nice like link intermediary, because usually you go Vampire Sucker and then eventually link it off into Sprite Elf, so that when you make Borreload Savage Dragon, you could attach the Vampire Sucker onto it as the negate, and then you have 2 negates on that Borreload Savage Dragon. So, and sometimes the Vampire Sucker will just allow you to go ahead and draw into like an insane top deck when you've run out of other plays. Now, it is important to keep in mind that you need 2 zombie monsters to be able to make it, but if you have Zombie World on the field, or if you're able to get like a Necro Banshee in the graveyard to activate Zombie World, then that could turn any of your monsters into an automatic Vampire Sucker. And that could be a very crucial way to be able to like maintain some tempo in the right circumstances. Again, you're not always going to be relying on it, but it's a nice card to be able to go to and fall back on if you need to go into like a Link monster to get bodies into the graveyard while also drawing cards along the way. Other than that, these are the decks that I went with. So I was playing Ash, I was playing Called By to counter Maxi, and honestly, Maxi is always going to be here, but you're not always going to draw the outs. You're less likely to draw the outs than your opponent is to draw the Maxi itself. So I figured I would just play Maxi so that I get my own counters to this meta, aka the DD Crow, the Imperm to try to deal with Dweller, stopping the Dweller setup, maybe stopping a kitkallos. I was even playing Forbidden Droplet. Honestly, like, this is just how I felt more comfortable in terms of like the ratio of text versus like actual engine pieces. This deck is all gas, and going first you could do some insane nonsense and deck out a whole bunch of maxis. Like, this deck is pretty fun to take the maxi challenge with. If you pop it off, then your opponent might honestly just be like signing their death wish if they maxi. But if you're going second, it becomes a lot harder. So that's where like, you could definitely like take more tech options. So you could play like Called By the Grave, you could play more Ash just to stop maxi, even though Ash just in general isn't very good this format. You could play Forbidden Droplet, but I just found that when I was playing more of those techs, I was also getting a lot worse mills off of the Chaos Ruler, and this is just what I felt more comfortable with in terms of making sure that I get like good pieces to extend and not just a bunch of dead mills. So, but I think it's a very strong deck. I mean, again, it's not a very competitive deck, but it's more of just a very fun way of playing zombies, and very much requires a lot of thought and skill expression in terms of how you manipulate your setups, understand the game state that you're in, and it takes a lot because you have to constantly check your deck, you have to constantly check your graveyard, and you have to constantly like think about, okay, how do I go from A to B? Because there's like efficient ways of doing it and less efficient ways of doing it. You could end on a smaller board, or you could end on a really huge board that's like unbreakable. We don't talk about Dark Ruler no more, but hey, at least you have Shufflers now, and Draw Phase, Abyss Dweller, and Fairy Tale Snow to at least interact with your opponent after they end up Dark Rulering no moreing you. So, and also it's not seeing as much play now that like Tearlaments is more in the meta and less so the sprites. So that's the whole idea of the deck. Again, you don't have to play the kitkallos, especially if in the future it gets banned. Then you could just play something like an Underworld Goddess, or you could play the Dark Charmer, or you could play Zeus, for example, since you can pretty decently go into like Xyz here. You could go into whatever synchros that you just like to play. You could play the level 10 Sword Soul synchro. You could play the Red Eyes Zombie Dragon Lord, add an artifact site here, and stop your opponent from being able to go into the extra deck if you summon the artifact site under Zombie World Live, which if you play Shooting Riser Dragon, could be your way of getting artifact site to the graveyard, as well as Fairy Tale Snow, depending on the game state. So you could play Nightmare Phoenix, whatever Link 2s you like, whatever Link 3s, 4s you like. You could play the Mayakashi Link 3, that's new, which has a lot of fun synergy, allowing you to special summon a synchro monster that's a zombie from your graveyard. So if you have a Baron de Fleur that's in the graveyard under Zombie World, it's now a zombie. So you could summon her off of that Mayakashi Link 3. You could also summon her off of the Mizuki, and that's a way of resetting its pop as well as its Omni Negate. So there's just like a lot of fun, neat interactions that Zombie World gives that just makes it unique to a lot of other decks. This version basically just tries to make very degenerate, dumb boards that can't be stopped, but man, it feels good when you do. And it's just a really cool way of being able to like express math. So that's the deck. Hopefully you don't get shuffled too much and enjoy it.